Hello everybody, and welcome to the second series in this video series, tutorial series, the series. So in this video we're going to be talking about how to unwrap UVs. This is everybody's favorite subject. So in the last video we quickly built a bunch of geometric shapes, really simple stuff, to build out a simple hallway. It almost looks like a plane now. Anyways, what I'm going to do is grab one version of all my objects. So that would be that and that. Oop, and one of these. Oops. Alright. And I'm going to shift select. So if you ever want the inverse of what's selected, so basically opposite, and sometimes this is better because sometimes you want more than half of what is in your scene, you just click on what you do want to keep and then shift select and then marquee select. So you see that completely grabs the opposite group of things in this scene. So I'm going to create a new layer from selected, and I'm going to hide that. Oops, it looks like I didn't actually add it to the layer. Add selected objects. Excellent. So now in our scene we have these components, and these are still all connected, so we're going to have to separate these very quickly. So I'm going to grab these down here. There's only 4 of them, but if you ever have multiple objects all grouped together and you want to separate them again, all you have to do is go into Mesh and then Separate. And now these are all their unique assets. So I'm going to grab 3 of these very clumsily. Oh my goodness. Alright. And I'm going to add those. And then I'm going to do the same thing to these up here. I'm going to go to Mesh, Separate, and then select 3 of these to go bye-bye. Alright. So now we have all the objects in this piece right now. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. So not a whole lot. It's actually very simple. But the reason I chose to do this scene, it's the hallway scene, is so that we get quite a few objects kind of grouped together to give us a more diverse set of things to unwrap. So let's start from biggest to smallest. I'm going to create one more new layer, and this is going to be where I'm going to throw all of my already finished objects. So real quickly, let's do the cylinder. So the big cylinder, we were talking about the normals earlier. So normally we would be rendering everything on the outside of this mesh. But because this is a tunnel or a hallway, we're going to do all of the inside faces. So I guess they're not individual faces, so their inside faces are still the outside faces, but we're just rendering the inside. So this is going to be a little bit more tricky to unwrap UVs for because it's just reverse what we normally do. Anyways, let's go ahead and do it. Grab Edit UVs, UV Texture Editor. I'm just going to have this up on the side. And I heard from a friend that there's a way to throw UVs on more quickly. I'm just going to use my old techniques. We'll go to Create UV, and we want to use a planar map. Planar map is really good standard way to start unwrapping stuff because it just takes everything that there is and places it within this one-to-one section. So we know we have everything we're going to need. Looks like that went away. UV's planar map, sorry about that. Alright, there we go. And I want to project in the y-axis, so this is just going to be pointing down. There's no good reason that I'm choosing the y-axis. All I want to do is make sure that I'm getting some angle where I'm getting a majority of the faces. I wouldn't want to choose this angle right here, which would be the Z, because I'm looking at them straight on. It's just not as ideal as looking at it from here or from here. So let's go with straight up and down. And what you're going to see is that we have this right here. So what this is, and I'm going to try and get as fundamental as I can. And what we're looking at here is this right here. And if we turn on the X-ray mode, we're seeing the same exact thing, except it's even further away. So if we were to go into the top view, we're looking at this. Look, it looks exactly the same as this. We're looking straight down on this object. So what we have to do is flatten this out. So imagine it like we're as a piece of paper, I think is the best analogy. So we have this tube of paper and we have to flatten it out. If we were to flatten out without cutting anything, it would have overlapping portions. If we were to just squash it, there's going to be two layers of paper, no matter how you try to unfold it. So what we try to do is to cut edges along our paper, which is going to act as a seam, so where these are going to be separated. And generally what we try to do is make those in a position that's hard to see for the audience. So in this case, I would choose this one on the bottom because there's going to be a bunch of crap in the way. We'll never see it. So I'm going to select that edge, and then I'm going to come up here into the Separate UVs tool, and I'm going to click it a bunch of times to make sure it's worked. And then I'm going to select the whole shell. Now the next thing I want to do is first I'm going to get you guys acquainted with just the unfold tool. So if we click on unfold, look what happened. It unfolded perfectly for us. We didn't have to play around with smoothing our UVs. It just unfolded. Now this is a really simple mesh. All it was a cylinder which I blew up, I changed the scaling of, and I deleted the face caps, and I reversed the normal. So there's a couple things we did to it. So it's very simple in that regard. As complex, as objects get more complex, the harder they become to unwrap. And that's why it's important to be very careful when we're modeling, not to do things like create n-gons and create faces that are on top of each other. Because as soon as we start doing that kind of stuff, it's going to make unwrapping UVs much, much harder. So that was a piece of cake. What we just did was totally easy. And we're off to a good start. So I'm just going to move these out of the way for now. I'll scale them down, kind of move them in this corner, just out of the way. And that will allow us to move on to our next portion. And I think the next thing we'll do, I said largest to smallest, didn't I? I guess the next largest thing would be this pipe right here. So already this pipe has UVs laid out for us. And because once again, I didn't change the geometry of this, I just lengthened it. I could just take these UVs and unwrap them and they would be fine, or unfold them rather, they'd be fine. But just for practice, I want to show you guys our same process, but once more. So the way I do this is I separate faces based off of my shells. So I select all the faces that I want in one shell. And in a tube like this, something that's perfectly round, it's okay to have all the faces around the entire object as one shell. In other instances, if there's really sharp angles between edges, I would break that up, and we'll get into that in a little bit as we do this piece over here. But in this piece, all I'm worried about is getting all the faces in. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to create UVs, planar map, and you can see right away it looks just like this. Now there's a problem with this, and I'll get into that right now. I might as well. The problem is that as I unfold this, and I can do that real quick actually, I'm going to select an edge at the very bottom where no one's ever going to see, this one right here. I'm going to cut, go back into UVs, select this whole shell, polygons, unfold. Perfect. And even did the end caps for me. How nice. So the problem is that this is a really long piece, and we might want to break it up. And the reason that we do that is so that we get more vertical length. So let me go ahead and go into object mode, and I'm going to insert an edge loop. And there's a trick that I've learned is if you use the equal multiplier and you just type in 1, it'll just insert an edge loop halfway in between your object. If you were to do this using new tools, which actually you should be, I shouldn't be teaching the old methods. I should be teaching you guys new stuff. Using the new methods with the multi-cut tool, if you hold down Shift and Control, you get snapping of the edge loops, and it'll snap to the middle. So same thing, different tool. And now what you can see is I have those edges all right here. And now what I'm going to do is select all of these edges and cut once more. So what I did is I separated this UV shell into 2 UV shells, as you can see right here. And what this allows us to do is scale these up so that they take up more space. See how much larger they got just because I was able to cut them. And because this is such a long pipe and it's such a big part of the scene, I think it's okay if I do this. So the only issue with this is that I've created an extra seam, which means there's going to be a point in which the textures don't line up exactly perfectly. But that's okay because what I did is I hid it right behind this pillar. So it'd be pretty hard to notice. And that's all what UVs are. It's trying to hide our mistakes all the time. Alright, so I'm going to go back into object mode. I'm going to select this and our pipe, and I'm going to add it to that layer I said I was going to add things to. Alright, and now we can move on to the next couple pieces. So let's talk about these ones. These are pretty simple. I'm going to go up into modify, and I'm going to center pivot this. I'm going to do the same with this, just so I have easier access to it. So this is an interesting piece. So how would you approach this? I want you guys to think to yourselves right now. How can I minimize my UV shells, but minimize distortion at the same time? I want the best of both worlds. Less distortion, less shells. The less shells, the less UV seams, the less somebody's going to notice something. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to project from my camera, and this is going to be a new tool which I'm teaching you right now. So I'm going to go up to create UVs based on camera. And if I go back to my UVs, we can see that it's created these UVs based off my camera orientation. And this is something that I use actually quite often. So what I'm looking at here is trying to find a way of unfolding this. If we were to unfold this right now by itself, and I'll do that real quick, it looks like a really terrible mess. It does not look good at all. Let's turn on this mode. You can see that, this is what our pixels are going to look like. They're going to look stretched. They're going to look awful. And let me go into this other mode right here. So this mode is telling us where the most stretching is happening. And it's happening at the highest degree turn, which is right here. So how do we cut these edges up so that we can relieve the tension, this red tension up here? Well, I think I'm going to start with this edge and this edge. And if you think about it, these edges are connected to vertices which are in all sorts of really high angle turns. So let's cut that real quick. And let's go back to UV. And I'm going to grab the whole shell. And now I'm going to start to unfold again. I'm going to double click on my tool and switch to UV space. And there we go. There's an interesting thing about the UV tool which I don't fully understand at the moment, and that it's Sometimes it turns red when it should, and sometimes it's red when it shouldn't. But let's turn on the checker pattern. And you can see that this is starting to look much better. And all I did was make 2 cuts right here and right here. Now if I wanted to go even further, I could start trying to cut up other stuff. I could try cutting this edge and this edge, although I don't think this will do us much good. Let's give it a shot though. And I'll try smoothing this out. And what you'll see is that actually gives me, when these are relieved of their tension, it's actually overlapping. So that's not so good. So what else could we do? Well, we could cut it along. Oh, come on. Edge. There we go. We could cut it along these edges, because these edges are also really sharp. They're like 90 degrees. So let's cut those real quick. And then what I'd have is a problem where these are all separated now. So these accidentally separated. They are not supposed to. So I can just reattach these real quick by grabbing this edge, which this share, and just move in so. And do it once more. And now we can try unfolding all of these pieces. And now you can see how this was wanting to really be, this space wanted to inhabit this much space, but it wasn't able to because it was attached to these. And now you can see that we have the absolute least distortion possible. And the reason that is because each one of these represents an orientation. These faces represent this side. These faces represent this side. They're separate shells. And these ones separate this side. And we actually were able to attach the last one down here. And that's because there's 3 faces in a row. So it's not a big deal. If there's 3 faces in a row, sharp angles don't matter. If there's faces attaching to the other sides, there's no way a hard angle would be straight like this over here. So it's really up to you whether you want less UV edges, or texture seams, less shells, less texturing headache, or do you want less distortion, higher quality UVs? So it's really up to you. I think in this case, I really prefer keeping these together, because the amount of distortion that we get out of this is not really too bad, although it looks like it's not going to let me do this without screwing everything up. It's because I forgot one. Thank you, autosave. Let's attach these again. And let's try this one more time. Excellent. So it looks kind of like an arrowhead, which is kind of funny. So you see, we do get a little distortion, but we get perfect UV continuation along this edge, which is nice because we can do a lot of easy work with edge wear. So let me do the same thing with this one up here. I'm going to create UVs based on camera. Perfect, perfect. To shell. Move this over. And turn off this headache-inducing thing. And let's take a look here. Where should I make my cuts? I think this time I'm going to choose these 2 edges up here. When I cut, I'm going to go to UV and I'm going to unfold. And it looks like it didn't actually cut that time. So let's try that again. Cut, cut, cut. To shell. And there we go. I can go to polygons and unfold. And now I get a perfect version of this. So you can see here the UVs are doing the correct thing where it's not showing any distortion at all. And if we look at this right here, we can see that these are very nice squares. Pretty easy once you get the hang of it, to be honest. All right, now this one, well, let's go ahead and add these to our other layer. All right, the next one is gonna be this floor plate right here. Now we have to think about this the same way that we have so far with the other objects. How do we get this to unfold with the least amount of shells and the least amount of distortion? And what I think I want to do is grab these faces right here, because I think this is actually going to be a separate kind of material. And oops, it looks like I have some n-gons. Let me go ahead and take care of that. Grab the vertice and the vertice. Two vertice. Sorry, I was looking for another tool. Let me not waste your time. I'll just use the multi-cut tool for now. Alright, and like I was saying, I want these faces separated from the rest of them. So I'm going to create UVs in a planar map, and I'll look at my UV texture editor, and I can just move this out of the way. I'll scale it down a little bit so it's not obnoxiously huge, and move it right here. Now let's continue to the rest of this. Now what I think I want is the rest of this to have the same material. So I'm thinking of having like a grate on top of this, and then having the rest of these faces textured as something else. So the first thing I can do is grab the bottom faces. And since those are going to be on the bottom, they're not as important, so create UVs, planar map. And I have my red one, so I'll go to UVs, and I'll flip it just like I did before. And because it's on the bottom, I can actually shrink this smaller than the size of the front one, because I'm not worried about people seeing the bottom of it, so I don't give it as much texture space. And this is one exception where you don't want all of your UVs to be the same size. If you know there's going to be a face where people aren't going to see the side, you just shrink those down. Just give them a little bit of whatever. All right, so now we're looking at this very last set of faces, and they're the ones that wrap all the way around, starting from here and then all the way to here. So there's a couple ways that we could unwrap this. If you're looking for the least amount of distortion and the least amount of UV, our texture edges, texture seams rather, we could do this approach. So let's go to create UVs, and I'm going to planar map just to give us something. All right, now they're down here. Now let's decide which set of edges we want to cut. And remember, if this is a piece of paper, we have to cut all the way through the piece of paper. We can't let there be any, pieces attached still. So what that means is I have to cut this edge right here, this edge right here, and this edge right here. So I'm going to select all those. And in this case, any of these edges are as good as the others. And I'm going to cut, and let's try unfolding. Let's see what happens. Unfold. It's not looking so good. So let's go ahead and use this unfold. And this is what we get. So once again, this is not really ideal. And the reason is because these edges are folding over. So we have these edges facing up and down. We have faces going left and right, and then we have faces going up and down on the other side. And they're all connected in this circle, which means there's a lot of tension between all of this stuff. But we can turn this on and see right here, and right here, and right here. So, what's one thing we could do to make this a little better? Well, one thing we can do is cut some more edges. So let's try this real quick. What I'm thinking is I want to cut the least amount of edges as possible. So I think I'm going to try cutting these edges, these ones right here, and these ones right here. And what this is doing is going to relieve the tension between these shorter faces, between these longer faces. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to cut real quick, and I'm going to hit it a couple times to make sure it worked. I'm going to go into UVs, select the whole thing, and I'm going to start to unfold again. Doesn't look like it did much, so let's try using unfold. So you can see that, yes, it sort of worked. It made it a little bit straighter. Still not perfect. So if you wanted to go with the least amount of distortion, texture seems galore, what you could do is cut all these. So now that they're all separate objects, all separate shells. And then what you could do is unfold all of these. Unfold. Oh my goodness, P-shell. And now you can see what happened. We have 4 individual faces and dead straight UV edges. See that? So like I was saying before, you have to pick and choose whether or not you want less distortion or more UV edges. In this case, this is the least amount of distortion, most amount of UV seams. So if we turn on the checkers, we can see exactly where those seams are. So in this case, we're going to have to do a lot of work in our texturing to fix those up, to make it not obvious. But the nice thing is that these are all going to be, remember, one by one. So I doubt we'll ever see those seams. So I think this is an okay approach. So I'm just going to grab all my UVs, and I'm going to move them off to the side. I'm going to hide all that. I'm going to call this done. Add selected. Alright, 2 more pieces left. Piece of cake. Let's do this one first. So in this case, we're going to be running into the same problem as the last one we were doing. So I'm going to grab these faces, and this is a separate object, so I can double click and it'll grab all the faces on it. Create UVs, create based on camera. So let's take a look at this one. If we look at the tension now, it doesn't seem too big, but if I grab all these UVs and I unfold these, unfold. Thank you for autosave. Man, I should be using autosave all the time. So useful. You can see we get quite a bit of distortion still, so I can turn on my grid mode, and we can see that yes, there is a heck of a lot of distortion going on here. So what's one way we could break these up? Well, the way I'm thinking right now is to cut along these edges, because this is the sharpest angle right here. You can see that's, once again, almost 90 degrees. So I'm going to cut that, and now I have 2 separate shells. And remember, I want to flatten this out, and the way I could do that with getting the least amount of UV shells is by cutting one of these. So I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to have one piece of paper which is going to unfold into a long piece. I don't know why I keep switching to world space. Long piece of paper. You can see just like that. And because this is such a weird shape, it's beveled in. The outside is wider than the inside. It's always going to retain a weird shape like this, so there's not much to do to get around this. And the next thing we could do is probably just unfold these. We could choose a UV seam, or actually let's just try unfolding these by themselves. So, unfold, I think about there is as far as I'll go, and it doesn't look too bad. There's some stretching, not perfect, but we can try and cut this anyways. So let's try cutting these edges. Cut. Grabbing UVs, I'm going to select this whole shell. Polygons. Unfold. And now we can see what's going on. So now we have these twisted shapes, which are giving us the least amount of distortion as far as UVs go. But there's another problem, is that they're curling up on each other. So they're going to take up a lot of room in our UV map, which is unfortunate. But it means we're going to get the least amount of distortion possible. Something you can do is, if you're running out of space, is start cutting things up even more. So let's say I could grab these edges and cut this. Now I just have 2 more shells. But I can optimize my space a little bit nicer by snugging these in right here and snugging these down here. Not too shabby. So once again, this is giving you the least amount of distortion possible, which means your textures are going to look really great, especially if they're procedurally driven. So the next set of faces on this object are these ones right here. I think this one's going to be very, very simple. I think we already accidentally unfolded it. Let's try turning that off. Grab the UVs. Unfold. No. So we're going to go with something like this. So sometimes I use the unfold tool, sometimes I use the unwrap tool. Try unfold. You can see it's kind of annoying, it doesn't let you choose faces. I think maybe if you're in face mode and you go to unfold, no, it has to be in UV, so it kind of just unfolds the whole object, which is slightly irritating. Should just do shells. Try that one more time. Yeah, it's got to be all or nothing. Kind of annoying. So that's when using this tool up here is a little bit more beneficial, because you can choose exactly what you're doing. So with this tool, I'm trying to find as far as it'll go and the least amount of distortion once more. And that's somewhere right about here, I think. Let's turn on the checker. I can see that, yeah, that looks pretty dang good. I can live with that. And it looks like maybe we can just rotate this 90 degrees. Maybe just sneak it in right here. I've seen worse. Alright, another piece done. Let's go ahead and add that. Now we have our very last piece. Alright, so this is going to be kind of a tricky one. And it's because this is a complex shape. The reason I say that is it's a box, so all of its angles are really sharp. And it hooks around. It's another interesting thing that's going to be difficult about this. So I'm going to grab all these faces on this hook part. I'm going to create UVs based off of camera. Create UVs based off camera. I'm going to pull this off to the side. And actually, if I grab these UVs, because once again, this was another shape that I just kind of stretched a little bit. Looks like that might be all I have to do. Let me try unfolding real quick. Not too bad. Alright, so let's talk about how to unfold this. Because this is such an awkward shape, we might have to be committed to cutting this up into 4 separate shells, where each side is its own shell. Before we do that, we'll try cutting up some edges and see what we get anyways. So I think the best case scenario would be to cut along these edges so that we would have 2 UV shells. So that would be this group of faces going up, and then the 3 sets of faces going up on the other side. So let's cut. I'll go to UV, and I'll go to shell, and I will drag this. Oh, it looks like it didn't work, so let's try that again. I think I forgot to grab these up here. Oh, yeah, I did that. So I'm going to cut all of these. cut, cut, cut. 2 shell. Much better. I'm going to go ahead and save real quick and edit, delete all by type. I'm going to delete my history too. Alright, so very quickly, we know this is red, and we know that's wrong. So let's go into UVs and bloop, fixed. And I'm going to unfold this, so let's go ahead and use the unfold tool so we can just do this individually. And that worked pretty easily. I think that's about as much as I'll get, and I think that's pretty good. Not too bad. This one is not going to be so easy. So let's try unfolding this really briefly and see what kind of catastrophe we have. So it looks like very similar to this other one. Let's see if that's giving us a problem. It might not be as bad as I thought. No. It's not good. You can see that there's a lot of weird stretching going on. And this would not fly. This would not fly at all. So what we're going to have to do is cut these all up into individual faces. Individual shells, that is. So I'm going to cut, cut, cut. I think that's all I'm going to need. Let's double check to make sure. Darn it. So I'm going to grab those same UVs again, or those same edges again, and I'm going to click on this one to make sure that when I cut these, they're all going to be separated. Let's try that again. 2 shell. Oh boy, instant fail. Let's try another approach. I'm going to grab all the faces around this side, and then I'm going to grab all the faces around this side. Now I'm going to do a planar map this time because I think that'll give me the best results. And that'll be based off of the z-axis right here. So I can go to create UVs, planar map, and then z-axis. There we go. Now we have 2 sets of UVs here, so I have to make sure that I go 2 shell. I just click on one UV and go 2 shell and move this down so that I can grab the red ones. Get rid of that headache again. 2 shell and then flip. And you can see that this is going to take a lot of work, especially so that we're trying to use up all this extra space that's here now. So I'm going to grab this pillar over here. I'm going to grab this pillar and I'm going to rotate it, because what it is basically a mirror of this. So if I rotate it 180 degrees, you can see that it fits nice and snugly like this. Snugly. And let's find a home for these faces. Let's choose this one right here. Good enough for me. And then we have the last piece. What was this to? Oh yes, that's right, the top. I could probably scale that up a little bit. Oh, there we go. So as we're doing our UVs, we're going to have to find an ideal way to get these to fit into each other. Let's see. That's not bad. I don't know if that's better than the other one. I guess we'll find out. Alright. So that was our last piece. Add selected. We have all of our pieces now. They're all UV textured. So I'm going to select all of them and go into edit UVs. And we're going to separate some stuff out. As you can see, it's a little messy, so it'll take just a moment. I'm going to grab all this because I know it's all one. This, what is this to? Oh, this is the big piece, so 2 shell. I'm going to move that around. I know this is something. I know the arrowhead is something. I know the pipe is something. And there we go. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that these all have good relative scale to each other. Excluding one thing. We're going to exclude this big thing. We're going to make this its own UV space. So I'm going to grab all of its UVs. And I'm going to scale them up so that they take up the most amount of space on this board as possible. And I think that's good. And now we want to select everything else. Now this is all going to share one texture space. Before I do that, I want to make sure they're all relatively scaled so that they all have these UVs set up so that you're not adding too much texture to one piece or another. So the first thing I want to do is grab my pipe, and I know my pipe is going to be the longest thing, so I can put it right there. Now let's grab everything else. So these faces are going to have to be pulled down way, way down. So now I'm just comparing these two. I think I could make this even a little smaller. That's about right. And then I'm going to move this down. I know it's going to probably be similar size to the last one we were doing. Even smaller, actually. So I'm just going to make an assumption that that's about right. Next we want this platform. And I know this is going to be pretty small compared to everything else. So I'm going to bring it to right about there. Let's shift select everything, make sure. Actually, it's a little bigger than that, isn't it? Let's make that bigger. Oops. Not grab things we don't want. So right about there. Then our next set of objects can definitely go down quite a bit. I think that's as far as I can go without compromising anything. And then our very last piece. Again, I get to scroll down way far, probably right about there. All right. So let's turn off all this junk. The very last thing that we have to do, now that these are all scaled relatively close to the same space, is fit them all in on this 1 to 0, 0 to 1 space. So this is, like I was saying earlier, it's like a game of Tetris where we have to figure out how things fit in with each other. That happened to work out nicely. I'm gonna grab all these to show, bring them down. Grab these to show. Oops, too far. Show. I'll move that down. As you can see, I'm going to have quite a bit of leftover room, which is okay. That means that I could add a lot more interesting stuff into my scene. I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want to waste the time with you guys. I know you guys probably want to go and start working on your own stuff instead of sit here and watch my videos all day. But this is going to finish this up basically. So we were talking about UVs and how it's a 2D representation of a 3D object. So it's reverse origami. We're building things in 3D and then we're deconstructing them back into 2D. And we want to do it so that there's less tearing, so that means separating these objects into separate shells. And we want to make sure that they're completely flat and they're not stretched. The least amount of distortion possible. We want the best of both worlds, and it's a little difficult to get both right away, of course. It takes a lot of practice. But this is kind of the gist of it. So now what I could do is I could go into my right view and I can start rebuilding all this stuff, which I just destroyed. Left view, let's try that. Oops, it looks like I grabbed it wrong platform. Make sure that's in the middle of this one. Oops. So you can see that as I move this stuff, they're moving in opposite directions. Let me explain that real quick. That's because the move is set to object orientation. So because these objects are facing different ways, they're going to go opposite ways. It's changing the Z translation for both of these. But Z translation for one means the opposite for the other. So to fix that, I could just change this to the world. And then there you go. So now that I have my UVs laid out, I don't have to be afraid to lay out my scene. Very poorly. Oops, it looks like I accidentally duplicated the pipe. All right. So now we have all these objects, and the UVs are laid out, and they're going to be stacked on top of each other. Oh, and remember, we have this separate UV shell which is handling this big thing, because we want this to have its own texture set. Alright, so that's about it. In the next video, we're going to talk about the final portions of creating a modular asset. We're going to texture it. We're going to do a combination of single textures and procedurally generated textures. So what we're going to do is do a procedurally generated texture on this big piece here, and maybe on a couple of these other pieces. This one, this one, and this one, as well as the pipe. And then this piece and this piece are going to have their own unique textures, I think. We'll see how it goes. They might all just share one big texture, now that I think about it. We'll see. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video. Good luck with your UVs, and if you get questions or you're caught up on something, just let me know and I'll help you along. Thanks guys, bye.